So UI font descriptor has a lot of knowledge in it about faces and how, is there a bold version of this? Is there a condensed version? Is there an italic version? And so it maps that into something we as computer scientists want to do because we want to put something in bold on the screen. Okay, so that's what UI font descriptor is all about. Even size, by the way, is designed into a font often. Okay, a designer of a font will design a larger S with a little more curve here and there than a smaller S. Okay, size is not just a matter of vector graphics zooming them in and out. Always, sometimes, depends on the font. So anyway, look at that slides that are in there to try and figure that out. There's nothing you will have to do in your homeworks that is font descriptor. You might have to do fonts, but not font descriptors, I don't think. Okay, you might want to if you want to do some advanced stuff. But so understand though that, yeah, when you do a font descriptor and you ask it for a bold version of a font, you might not get a bold version. You'll get the best thing it can come up with, but it might not actually look bold depending on what font it is and whether it has a bold, etc. Okay, so now let's talk about how text looks on screen. Well, the font is a big part of how text looks on screen. Depending on which font you pick, that's going to determine a lot what it looks like. But there's a lot of other things that determine what a font looks like on screen. For example, is the thing underlined? Is it outlined? Okay, how strongly stroked is the outer edge of the font? Okay, those things are all kind of independent of the font. You can apply these things to any font. So there's a new class that you're going to learn that's in Foundation called NSAttributedString. And an NSAttributedString, very, very simple. It's like, it is not an NS string, but it's like an NS string where every character has a dictionary of attributes. And those attributes are like underlined or stroke width, the font, etc. Okay? Now, the reason I say it's like NS string, it's not a subclass of NS string. You cannot send it string messages. Okay? So that seems like a significant restriction, and it is, and we'll talk about how we're going to deal with that in a second. You set the attributes simply by calling, this is NSAttributedString. It's immutable, not modifiable. So you cannot set the attributes of a NSAttributedString. There is a mutable attributed string. We'll talk about that in a second. So you get the attributes by calling attributes@index, and it will return you a dictionary with all the attributes for the character at that index. And that NSRange pointer, if you pass it a pointer to a range struct, it'll fill it in with how many characters have the exact same attributes. Okay? So it's basically, you specify the location that you want the attributes, and if a whole bunch of characters have those exact same attributes, it'll return that range if you ask it. Does that make sense? What that range is? It's basically just telling you how many characters have the attributes you asked for at that character. You can pass null if you don't care, if you just want to know the attributes of that character. So NSAttributedString is not a string, but we want to do string-like things. We want to search for other substrings and things like that we do on a string. So there's a method in NSAttributedString, a really important one, called string. Okay? And this will return an NS string that you can then search in or do all the string things you want. For example, if we wanted to search, there's a method in NSString called rangeOfString, which returns an NS range that tells you where a substring is in a string. And so we can just say we have an attributed string lying around, and we're looking for some substring. We just say attributed string string, rangeOfString string, and we'll get the range back. Okay? Now, that string method is guaranteed to be very high performance, because you're doing this all the time. You want to look at the NSAttributedString like a string. So it's high performance. However, it's also volatile. Bottom line is, this thing is probably returning you a pointer to that NSAttributedString's internal data structure, or some parts of it, or something. You don't really know what it is. You know whatever it returns is an NS string. But so if you want to keep that thing around for more than just right there where you call it, make a copy of it. Okay, then you have a copy of the NS string. You can hold on to it. You almost never need to do that because you're almost always operating on the string right there in place like this, a rangeOfString. You're just trying to get it. Okay? Okay, so that's string, very important property in NS string. So there is a mutable one, okay? And mutable one, it does inherit from the non-mutable attributed string, but it's not an NS string or an NS mutable string. It's an NS attributed string. And it adds these methods to add attributes and set attributes at various ranges inside the attributed string. Okay? Exactly what you would think. And we're going to talk about what's in these dictionaries in a couple slides. Now, what if you want to modify the characters in a mutable attributed string? Okay? Exact same thing as the attributed string. When you want to look at the characters, you call this method mutable string. And it will return an NS mutable string. And believe it or not, if you modify that mutable string that you get back, the mutable attributed string, its attributes will track your changes. So like if you insert some text, the new text will get the attributes of the character right where you inserted it. Okay? If you delete characters out of that mutable string, then the mutable attributed string, those character attributes will just go away. Make sense? So these classes, NS mutable string and NS mutable attributed string, are in bed with each other, and just like NS attributed string and NS string are in bed with each other. Okay? I don't know how they did it at Apple, but it's really nice because it makes it really easy to manipulate both the characters and the attributes in an attributed string. Okay? Okay, so what kind of attributes are in those attributes dictionaries? One of the big ones is the font. Okay, so this is a dictionary. The key for the font is NS font attribute name. Okay, and you can look up these keys by going and looking in NS. If you look up NS attributed string in the documentation, there's a link there which is UI kit additions to NS attributed string, and all the keys that I'm going to talk about are there. And one of the keys is NS font attribute name, and the value of that is a UI font. So this is where you would get a preferred font of a certain style, like a headline, let's say, in this case. Okay? So if I had a dictionary that just had this in there, nothing else, the default text color is black, probably my letter A would look like that. Okay? What if I added this key value pair to my dictionary? NS foreground color attribute name, UI color, blue color. So here the key is this foreground color attribute name. The value is a UI color. So that changed it to blue. Okay? And I could change it to green if I wanted to. Be a little bit careful when you create an attributed string that has colored text, because in iOS 7, the color of text sometimes is an indicator to the end user what they can touch. Okay? And so if you're it turns out apps in iOS kind of have a theme, a color theme. The default is blue. That's why our machismo, the buttons that we make, will be blue. But they can be different colors, like orange. It depends on what tint you want your thing to be. But whatever your color is of your app, that color you can usually tap on. Okay, that's the color of text on buttons, text at the top of the screen that navigate places. So be careful not to set anything else to be that color unless you can tap on it. Okay, so be a little careful with color. There's also stroke width attribute and stroke color. The width attribute, and pay attention to this because you'll need this probably for your homework. If that is it's an NS number. If it's a negative NS number, then that means fill the glyph, you know, the A, fill it and stroke around the edge. If it's a positive number, it means just do the stroke around the edge and the middle is transparent. Okay? What else can we have? Underline style attribute name. So that's an NS number that has an enum, one of NS underline style single or double, or there's also NS underline style none. That would be no underlining. There's also background color. So here, just to show you that this is possible, I set the background of this glyph to be a transparent yellow. Okay, it's 30% visible, 30% towards opaque. Yellow. So you see how it's kind of, you can see the chalkboard showing through there. I don't know if that'll show up in iTunes U, but here hopefully you can see, I can see through that yellow background. Okay. In your homework, you might want to think about using transparent colors somewhere else. Okay, not the background of a character, maybe the fill color or something. Anyway, okay, so transparent colors, good. Okay, so hopefully you're all getting a feel then for how we build this dictionary. And okay, all we need to do is set the attributes of the characters that we want to have this particular set of attributes. Okay, so where do we use attributed string? So I can create an attributed string. It's got all these attributes. Okay, where do I use it? Well, I can use it in a button. Okay, I can set the title of a button to be an attributed string. That might be useful for your homework. We can create a UILabel that has an attributed string, and a very important class, which I'm probably going to talk about next time, which is UI text view. UI text view is like a UI label, but it's editable, selectable, scrollable, etc. Okay? So let's talk about button. Actually, I'm not going to talk about button except for to say it's important for your homework. It just has a method set attributed title. Just like it has set title for state, it has set attributed title for state, and you're going to want to use that. It's also possible to draw strings directly on screen, but we haven't talked about drawing on screen directly yet, so we'll postpone until we talk about that next week. But we will be able to draw attributed strings on screens directly, just like we can draw lines and things like that directly on screen. UILabel has a property. It's an NSAttributedString called attributed text. It's just like the text label, which is an NS string, which you've already used in this class. We like the score label and the flips label. We set the text property. So there's an attributed text property, and you just set that property to be an NSAttributedString instead of an NS string. And that's it. Unfortunately, it's read-only. Okay, it's immutable. That property, you see, it's not an NS-immutable attributed string. It's an NS-attributed string. So if you want to change the attributed text that's on a UI label, you have to get the label, make a mutable copy of it, modify it however you want, and put it back. Okay, that's if you have an existing label and you want to make it be blue instead of green or something like that. You have to get it, create a mutable copy, modify the attributes, put it back. Okay? You don't need to do this very often on labels. Labels don't usually have attributed text on them that much, maybe to set the color, possibly if they're specialty labels that are kind of specifying something that's not just normal text. So it's not that common to do UILabel. So that's all I'm going to cover for today, I think. We do have a Friday section. The time is being confirmed to me probably as I speak right now. I will post that for you on Piazza. It's on Friday. I believe it's going to be at 1 o'clock on Friday in 102. Okay, you're at 102, but don't hold me to that yet. Look at Piazza. We're going to be talking about debugging. There are some new debugging things for iOS 7 that are pretty cool. We'll get to a couple of them. And we're also going to talk about Xcode tips and tricks. So command key combinations that are really valuable to have, how to set some preferences up to make your experience a little nicer. So it's totally optional. You don't need to go there. A lot of you know Xcode. You're probably used to debugging, at least in other languages. So you know, if you miss it, it's not going to be the end of the world, but it might be valuable. Next Monday, I'm going to talk about UI text view, since it's the most important user of NS mutable attributed string. Okay. And then I'm also going to talk about the radio station from MVC. Remember that MVC model? I told you that sometimes communication happens by radio station, where you broadcast and some other objects tune in. We're going to talk about doing that. And then I have a big demo that does attributed strings and text views and all that stuff. And then we're going to start talking about the view controller lifecycle, okay, which is your view controller. It comes into existence, things happen to it. It appears on screen and goes off screen, it changes size, things like that, and then it goes away. Okay, it goes off screen and then maybe even disappears. And as all that happens, you get notified by the system. Okay, and it's important to know when you're going to get notified and what to do where in terms of that notification. So we'll be talking about that on Monday, view controller lifecycle. Super important one for your next homework. Your next homework might go out on Monday, might go out next Wednesday. I'm not quite sure yet. But in any case, it'll be due a week later. So that's it. If you have any questions, I'll be here, and I'll see you next time.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.